Well, Tim, thank you. Tim's an old friend, and he outdid himself. I've been called many things before, but never an institution, and I will treasure that. Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. It's an honor to speak to the members of an organization that have added so much to our nation's foreign policy debate over the years. And that tradition was beautifully exemplified by the film that we just saw. And in thinking about how I might try to live up to that tradition, I set out to sum up lessons learned from the war in Iraq and how we're back on track, focusing on the right enemy, al-Qaeda and the Taliban, in the right place, Afghanistan and Pakistan. I had planned to lay before you tonight a vision of a world inspired by a young American president who summons us to look beyond party and politics, to work together here at home, and to engage our allies around the world to confront the threat of religious extremists preaching fanatic intolerance. The power of President Obama's message, dramatized in Prague and Berlin when multitudes showed up to cheer him, holds the promise of regaining the goodwill of people around the world. The President's decision to end torture, to close Guantanamo, to talk to our enemies, and to reduce the threat of nuclear annihilation shows the world that America is willing not only to lead, but to listen. But then last week, a voice from the recent past reemerged, claiming that America can do what we please, preaching unilateralism again, and embracing the arrogance that for too many years alienated our friends and set back efforts to achieve common goals. Former Vice President Cheneys' worldview, which so dominated the Bush years and which so dishonored our nation, gained a little traction last week. Enough to persuade me to address it head on here tonight. I do so as chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, which recently completed an 18-month investigation into the abuse of detainees in U.S. custody and produced a 200-page bipartisan report which gives the lie to Mr. Cheney's claims. I do so because if the abusive interrogation techniques that he champions, the face of which were the pictures of abuse at Abu Ghraib, if they are once more seen as representative of America, our security will be severely set back. When former Vice President Cheney said last week that what happened at Abu Ghraib was the work of a, quote, few sadistic prison guards acting on their own, he bore false witness. And when he said last week there was no link between the techniques used at Abu Ghraib and those approved for use in the CIA's secret prisons, he again strayed from the truth. The seeds of Abu Ghraib's rotten fruit were sown by civilians at the highest levels of our government. On September 16, 2001, Vice President Cheney suggested that the United States turn to the dark side, his words, in our response to 9/11. Not long after that, the White House counsel, Gonzales, called provisions of the Geneva Conventions quaint, and President Bush determined that provisions of the conventions did not apply to detainees captured in the Afghanistan war. Senior administration officials followed the President and Vice President's lead. Our recent bipartisan Senate Armed Services Committee report determined the following, quote, senior officials in the United States government solicited information on how to use aggressive interrogation techniques, redefined the law to create the appearance of legality and authorized their use against detainees, close quote. The aggressive interrogation techniques which our government authorized for both the CIA and the military were derived from a Defense Department training program called SERE, S-E-R-E, which stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. This program was developed to train our troops how to resist abusive interrogations, torture, by enemies who refused to follow the Geneva Conventions. Many techniques used in the SERE training program are based on abusive tactics which were used by the Chinese communists during the Korean War. For them, their purpose was not to elicit accurate information, it was to force confessions out of U.S. soldiers to be used for propaganda purposes. Under highly controlled settings, U.S. military personnel in SERE training are subjected to techniques like waterboarding, being slammed against a wall, confinement in small boxes, stress position, forced nudity, and sleep deprivation. SERE training techniques are legitimate tools for training our people. They prepare our forces, who might fall into the hands of an abusive enemy, to survive by giving them just a small taste of what might confront them. The techniques were never intended to be used against detainees in our custody, but they were used, and it was officials at the highest level of our government who authorized them. In 2002, with Mr. Cheneys and the National Security Council's blessing, SERE techniques were approved for use by the CIA in interrogating detainees. Our bipartisan committee report found that on December 2nd, 2002, techniques that we saw in photos at Abu Ghraib, including nudity, stress positions, and dogs, were formally approved by the Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld for use by Department of Defense personnel against detainees at Guantanamo. Our report showed in about 20 pages of detail how Secretary of Defense's 2002 authorization of the aggressive techniques at Guantanamo led to their use in Afghanistan and in Iraq, including at Abu Ghraib. Now, the Chinese communists during the Korean War may not have cared if the confessions that they elicited for propaganda purposes were false, but it should matter to us. If American troops are going to risk their lives acting on leads gained from these interrogations, we better be certain that the information is accurate and reliable. We cannot have that level of confidence from information obtained from abusive interrogation practices. In a May 2007 letter to his troops in Iraq, General Petraeus said the following: "Some may argue that we would be more effective if we sanctioned torture or other expedient methods to obtain information from the enemy. They would be wrong," he said. "Beyond the basic fact that such actions are illegal, history shows that they are also frequently neither useful nor necessary. Certainly," he said, "extreme physical action can make someone talk. However, what the individual says may be of questionable value." And before these interrogation techniques were approved for Guantanamo in December of 2002, a senior Army psychologist warned against their use. And this is what he said: "If individuals are put under enough discomfort, i.e. pain, they will eventually do whatever it takes to stop the pain. This will increase the amount of information they tell the interrogator, but it does not mean that the information is accurate. In fact, it usually decreases the reliability of the information because the person will say whatever he believes will stop the pain." The risks of relying on information obtained from the use of harsh techniques cannot be overstated. We went to war based on false information.